Hello, everyone, and welcome to Light Haven, the podcast for all things spiritual, mystical, and energetic. My name is Ruth, mystery student towards the awakening of consciousness.
And my name is Bianca, astrologer and Reiki practitioner.
Today's episode is called Healing Our Fragmentation. We're going to be diving a little deeper into the psyche, how it behaves often in some very weird and wonderful ways. And this is important stuff because the more we can understand ourselves, our mechanics, and maybe our go to habits and patterns, some of the workings of our internal mechanisms, then the more we can almost become something of a spy that can spy on our internal workings. And that gives us the chance to be able to hack it. So it's going to be lots of fun as we dive into this topic. But first, let's start with the astrological weather.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. So I was caught up with I guess my mind was focused, has been focused this whole week on the Venus retrograde coming up. And I believe it turns retrograde on later on in about 2 weeks' time. So um, I I went on this deep dive to uh, through the synodic cycle of Venus, which is the cycle between the Sun and Venus, and what it can symbolize or represent in relation to our different stages of where we might be at psychologically or experientially. And there is this myth called the descent of Inanna, or Ishtar. Do you know? Have you heard of this before, Ruth?
Well, I've heard of the concept of a descent, and I'm not sure if this myth is about that. There is the idea that to grow, we have to go through something of a descent, kind of like a fall, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, reach our rock bottom, our low point, and then we have some kind of a comprehension, an epiphany, and we realize where we want to get to. I'm not sure if this kind of descent has anything to do with that or if it's going to be something completely different. But I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Yeah, you're right on. It is as you described, basically, the descent, and it's almost like symbolic of the journey we go through when something's piqued our interest and we've decided to embark on a journey and out of pure curiosity. And it this myth, the descent of Inanna, is describes that journey. And so it's really cool to see it relating to Venus and its cycle with the sun. So now, just to give you guys the setting, the background, so this myth is a very ancient myth, 2000 to 3000 BCE. So we're going way back. I think Western astrology wasn't even a thing until 300 to 400 BCE. So this is going back centuries before Western astrology was a thing, and it's set in Sumeria, which today we know as southern Iraq. And this area of the world was known as one of the earliest civilizations, known as the cradle of civilization. And here is where we see the invention of writing, where it occurred on clay tablets. And some of the earliest pieces of writing on these tablets were these myths, such as like the hymns of Inanna. And Inanna slash Ishtar is also representative of Venus. So when I say Inanna, I'm pretty much saying Venus. So here we see, even with like the these clay tablets that have all these myths written on them. We also see through this the first astrological evidence of, say, so back in the ancient days, they the astronomers were priests, and they would look to the skies, the heavens, and they would observe the movements of the planets. And they believed that the movements of the planets were symbolic of the manifestations of their gods. And so they would write down or make note of the correlations between what they were witnessing in the sky and what they were experiencing here on earth. And so, but even then, even before that, before the evidence of writing came about, there were artistic descriptions of goddess Inanna shown as the symbol of the eight-pointed star. Have you heard of that um,
Not the
at all?
eight-pointed star,
The
but
five-pointed star as
yeah,
well,
the
but
five-pointed star is
yeah.
a common symbol that is seen in both positive and negative types of spiritual groups.
Hmm.
When it is facing upwards, that is a symbol of God and protection and looking
Okay.
towards the light. And
Hmm.
then when it's facing downwards, those are those maybe negative, darker types of groups that want to work with black magic and dark entities.
I
But
see.
yeah, it's been misconstrued because you see a lot of movies that have the
Mm.
star upside down, and then everyone thinks that the star is bad, but it
All
just
right.
depends on the direction of it. But the
Okay.
eight-pointed star, no.
Mm. So I'll just share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Just share. You can see my little mouse. Do you see it? Um, I just got this off Wikipedia, but
Ah,
you
I
can
see the
see.
star and the
Mhm.
images.
Yeah.
So
So we've
that's on
got.
a tablet.
Mhm. So we've got the sun, got the crescent moon, and then the eight-pointed star, which is Venus. And so here we can see that Inanna slash Venus slash Ishtar is represented way, way back, inscribed on tablets. So, but the story of Inanna, how it goes is she was the queen of heaven and earth at that time, and she was married to someone called Dumuzi, known as the shepherd Dumuzi, and they celebrated it in like uh, a marriage that was part of what we now know is would become like a ritual, like a sacred marriage rite. So this is kind of representative of the beginning. It's like the beginning of the marriage ceremony in a way. Well, we know there's other myths that describe the marriage between a woman and a husband, but the
Oh, I
union.
see. So it was like the a myth that then became the marriage ceremony for this culture.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see so myths depict that are symbolic of something that we already know to be true, like it resembles something, some kind of truth to in our experiences. So it's like they got married, and that's an example of marriage here on earth,
Right. Yeah.
almost like Adam and Eve, if you want to, go back into the
Yeah.
Bible. And so it was almost kind of symbolic like that as well, just this sacred marriage rite that um, consummated their marriage together as a couple. So she was the goddess of love and fertility and of land. Now, it's important to understand as well is that she changes as well. There, she is known as the goddess of fertility of the land, of love, but then she is also known later on in her mythological journey as the goddess of war and power. And I can describe a little bit later on as we get through it, the stages. You'll see what I mean by how she goes from being this goddess of love and this and she's in her power as a person who's supported by Demutsi, right? And she's yeah. So there's a stage where she begins on her journey as a married woman, goddess, um, fully supported, as you would imagine when you're married and you feel, you're in this union with someone, um, and life is great. It's tranquil. It's just easy and not a care in the world, and you just feel like you've got full reign and dominion over all aspects of your life. Now, um, her also was like her happiness was and her well-being was critical in Sumeria, aka Southern Iraq, because it was like if she was happy, then they would have lots of crops growing, the harvest would be great, and they would be able to feed their people, and they would have excess to be able to sell and grow and be abundant and prosper. So if her well-being was taken care of, and if she was happy, then that reflected on earth in terms of the crops and abundance going on for the people, for mankind. So I'm talking about this. I'll just go in stages. There's a few stages here, but stage one is like I said, we're all happy, we are in our little blissful bubble, and we don't have any complaints, and we're just coasting along in life, feeling like we are in this perfect union, and nothing can deter us. But then but then something picks our interest, and we get curious, and we're like, well, and you just can't shake this feeling that there's something that you want to explore, that there's a different path that you want to go down. But it's not so different in terms of I'm going to leave my marriage and embark on a path that's completely my own. It's just like you're a little bit curious, and you want to maybe find out a little bit more about what else is out there. Surely this isn't all that there is to life. And so in this first stage of in the mythology or the descent of Inanna, she hears that her brother-in-law, who was married to her sister, has passed away. Now her sister is the queen of the underworld, and she hears about her brother-in-law passing and decides that she wants to go and visit the underworld and pay respect to her brother-in-law who passed. The thing about this decision to go into the underworld was that she's not on good terms with her sister. so so she still embarks on this journey. So we're in the stage two where we're like, all right, we're really doing this. I'm going to go, and I'm going to start this journey, this descent down into underworld to pay homage to my brother-in-law who's now passed away, regardless of how my relationship is with my sister, regardless of whether she wants me there or not. I'm still going to just go down there and do my thing. Now, the descent into the underworld at this stage is she's just embarking on a journey. She's taking action. And what we could think of in uh in our like experience here in the now, our earthly experience could be kind of like well, more of those with the natal placements. If I was to look at a birth chart and I could see that Venus is where Venus is in position with the sun, I might be able to see or understand certain themes playing out in someone's life that have to do with a sudden curiosity of, say, sexual mystery or taboo, and you are uh, maybe taken against your will, or feel like you can't fight this urge, and you have to explore these deeper, darker um, uh, curiosities, and you someone with this natal placement of, and I can see with the in relation to where Venus is with the sun, I can see that maybe psychologically they feel like there is an interest that's not in alignment with like societal norms, and so it makes it difficult for this person to connect with and foster normal relationships because of their inability, their their need for something different, or they're kind of like they're trying to hide a part of them that they
Is it
have identified with.
is it only related to intimate, interpersonal types of encounters, or is there
No,
another application?
there could be things like, and like this has only come up because this is Venus, goddess of love,
Sure. Yeah.
and relationship, harmony. But it can also just mean if you feel like there's parts of you that's not accept that's that doesn't conform with the societal norms. It doesn't have to
Right.
be sexuality, but just
Right.
anything that might
Or,
not be, you know, the status quo. You
right.
feel like you have to be a little bit more. I don't know. You feel like you're kind of having to go against your what you feel like your natural nature is to feel
Right.
to be. So,
Could it also be if maybe someone is interested in someone that is not the usual uh, person you bring to a barbecue,
mm,
and then exploring that, like
mm,
not your usual kind of um, clean cut character, but maybe someone like with a different personality or different
mhm.
interests? Would that also be included in this kind of thing?
I just got an image of what you were describing. I think transits, like rather than seeing it in a natal placement, I could see that happening in a transit of someone captures your interest who is different to you, who might not be the same or have the same interests as you, is a little bit different to your usual community or the usual group of friends that you align with. I could see this happening with you. You suddenly now find yourself interested in someone who's a little bit mysterious, and you want to get to know them better, and they're just different to what your usual type is. I could totally see that. It wouldn't. The only reason why I don't think of it as a natal theme is because
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more to it that goes a bit deeper than that. So
Right.
yeah, transits, sure. I don't see why not. But there, but psychologically, there's this calling to go deeper within yourself and discover and like, I guess, how am I trying to say this, and bring to light these hidden deep dark things that you don't even know yourself what it is, but you feel
Mm-hmm.
like you have to discover it for yourself, and you have to go on this journey to do that.
And
And
during this transit, is it all of us that are going to be feeling and working with these energies, or is
mm,
it just certain people?
now this is a this cycle, the synodic cycle of Venus and the sun, is a 2-year cycle. so
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's the first stage, the first and second stage. Like we could be talking about like stage one might be, I don't know, 80 days. And then stage eight might be 180 days. And then, I don't know, stage four might be just like 7 days. So it gets like the cycle is a little bit more kind of bigger than what you might be thinking. So yeah, but yeah, it's approximately 2-year cycle. And if we want to be very specific, which we don't want to be, but there's also an 8-year cycle. So we'll just
Right.
leave it at
But it
that.
applies to all of us. It applies to all
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
But it's also, and as well as that, it also is like these are things that we can put these stages, these feelings of curiosity or of like being called to go deeper, to discover deeper truths about yourself. All of these are very just like broad, basic concepts that all of us have felt at one point or another in our life. So, so the yeah, so we all would be feeling this at different times of our life, right? Because we all have a different, yes, the transit is the same because we're all experiencing the same stage, but the transit needs to correlate with where you're at in your natal placements as well. So we also have to keep that in mind. So some might be feeling these stages a lot more acutely than some others of us, you know. So but there would be in this stage of deciding to descend where Inanna is like, all right, I'm going down. I'm not there in the underworld yet, but it's going to take me a couple of weeks to get there, and I'm on my journey down. It's no longer just thinking about it, it's action, like actions. And at this stage, we are thinking we have questions about like sexuality, self-esteem, self-worth, and assessing our ability to socialize with the norm in society. So these are all things going on in our head as we decide to uncover more layers of ourselves. So then we get to stage 3, and we are now knocking on the underworld's door, and we are like, knock, knock, please let me in. And now stage 3 is, so I told you about how Inanna Venus wasn't really on good terms with her sister, the Queen of the Underworld. Well, she she catches wind of Inanna's descent to come to her, and she's like, her sister is called Ereshkigal. It's a bit of a mouthful. Ereshkigal is like, well, before you get to me, you have to pass through 7 gates. There's a lot of symbolism in some of
Really?
these. A lot of
Wow.
symbolisms
Okay.
behind
Very
these.
interesting. Yeah, because 7 tests or challenges of the soul appears a lot in a lot of uh, studies to do with the psyche.
Mhm.
Very interesting.
There's a lot more, but I'm like, I'm just watering it down a little bit. There's a lot of other symbolism if we choose to go down that route. But yeah, so 7 gates she has to pass through before she can get to Ishkigal. And oh, by the way, when Inanna Venus decided to make the descent down, she in that stage 2 period where she's actually like, on her way down, she she decided to adorn herself in like the royalty that she is. She's a goddess, so she had like the headdress on, and she had like the gown, and she's got like a beaded necklace and a ring and a breastplate, and she's got like a, I don't know, like a sepulcher or something, and yeah, something, and she's like making her way down with the best intentions. And I think that when we are descending or when we're embarking on a journey, we don't always know what's ahead. So we have the best intentions that we are going to uncover and discover ourselves in ways without the we don't realize like what's actually going to happen to us, right? But we're doing it anyway, and we're optimistic, and we're going ahead, you know, full royalty outfit, just like, this is, I am a goddess, and I'm going to journey down and look my best while I'm doing it.
So we
But
can have a lot of confidence before we face our tests.
we have a lot of egos that we put on
Mm.
as we go down.
Hmm.
So
Right.
now she has an usher. Ishkigal sends a porter to Inanna to usher her through these gates. And before she can progress through the gate, she has to take off either a piece of jewelry or an item of clothing as she goes through. So the more gates she passes through, the more she's having to take off of herself and strip away these adornments. So when she finally gets through to Ishkigal, who's sitting on her throne, she is completely naked. Inanna, Venus, is just stripped, completely bare, completely vulnerable, standing there in front of her sister who has all the power in this underworld realm. And I felt like that's quite symbolic of our journey. It's almost like we uncover a lot of things that don't feel very good to us, and we realize a lot of things about ourselves, a lot of things that we're holding on, a lot of masks that we have, that in order to truly dig deep and get to the bottom of what it is that we're curious about or what it is that we're seeking to uncover, we have to be completely stripped of all our egos, of everything, to be able to be fully transparent and be faced with our demons or faced with our the truth, you know. So
Hmm. We
it's very
remove all of
symbolic.
those layers that
Mhm.
obscure the heart of us, and when we get to the other side of the darkness, there is a core part of us that is beautiful and bright and pure and
Mhm.
virtuous, but it takes going through the darkness and shedding those layers to find that essential part.
Exactly. So now we come to stage 4. So stage 3 was the going through the gates. And actually before I move on to stage 4, just at stage 3, before she starts going through the gates, when she's at the entrance of the of about to go into the actual underworld, she has an assistant, and she says to her maid or her assistant, look, if you don't hear from me within 3 days, go and alert the gods. And she says, I've written here, she tells her maid, her assistant, to alert the gods if she doesn't appear or if she doesn't hear from her in 3 days. And she says, this is I just got this out of the myth itself. Just she says, my assistant with wise words, my messenger with effective speeches, here I am, going to the world below. When I have arrived there, raise a lamentation of catastrophe in my favor. Beat the drum at the assembly seat. Visit the residences of the gods one by one. Tear your eyes, tear your mouth, and, like Pulper, wear only a strip of cloth. So not only does she want her messenger, her maid assistant, to go and alert the gods that she hasn't returned from the underworld, and to call for help, you know, to bring her out of the underworld. She also wants her assistant and the gods to be mourning for her and like lament for her and be like, oh, you know, my goddess, where are you? You know, you're gone. so that's and it's key kind of towards the end, because there's some things that ultimately happened, that because of the lamentation and the mourning that they went through. So, but we are now she's now face to face with her sister, who's on the throne, and Inanna, Venus, is completely naked and bare and just very vulnerable, at her most vulnerablest. And this is almost like a dark night of the soul moment, where you're just like, just completely stripped, you know. And so Eshkigal orders um, upon her the condition of remaining dead, because remember, underworld, you have to be dead, and then kills Inanna and hangs her corpse on a peg to rot. And it was kind of like saying, Inanna, Venus, like, you came to the underworld, therefore you have to die like everyone else. Like, there's nothing about you that's special. You're like everyone else. So here you go, you know, and she dies. Of course, the assistant doesn't hear from her in whatever 3 days and goes to alert the gods. And she goes and rallies up support, but some of them were like, well, we're not going to help because that's what she chose to do. She willingly went down to the underworld. What did she expect? This is the consequence of her actions. We're not getting involved. And it's a little bit funny because I feel like when we go through something, right, psychologically, we're kind of in inner chaos and turmoil. We have our dark night of the soul. And sometimes a part of that is losing some of the people you thought were your friends. It's kind of like shedding. It's like people realizing who really supports you and who's not supporting you, who's really there for you, who's not. So it was very symbolic, in my opinion, of that
Mm.
type of thing.
And also to me, a death as well, like if we're talking about that journey to go into darkness and
Mm-hmm.
then hopefully if the myth is going where I think it's going, coming back out,
Mm-hmm.
then
We
we
get that,
do,
yeah.
yeah, we do undergo a kind of death in our process of comprehending our
Mm-hmm.
darkness and then becoming better. The things that were sort of in the way of that journey do have to die in a
Mm-hmm.
way for us
Mm-hmm.
to carry on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what this topic is all about, healing our fragmentation. We
Mm-hmm.
have so many parts, and when we are embarking on a journey to improve, then the parts that we find that don't serve us in our journey, once we discover them and we understand them, then we do have to let go and let those parts die off.
Mm-hmm.
So death is actually, it's not a scary symbol, even though you describe the hanging corpse, it can sound like a little bit morbid, but in psychological symbology, death is a beautiful symbol of
Mm-hmm.
transition and letting go of
Mm-hmm.
our darkness and transcending it.
Mm-hmm. I also think, yeah, the hanging of the corpse is sorry, a bit graphic, is very also symbolic of the level of anguish or turmoil that we could find ourselves. We're literally the bottom of the barrel and we don't think that there's any way out. And yeah, we die. But it can be, yes, a symbolic death of an ego or something like that. So yeah, but it doesn't have to be that graphic or that painful. But yeah, dark night of the soul, what are you expecting? It's not going to be a bed of roses, although a bed of roses have thorns too. But so we're here, she's dead. And the messenger goes to alert the gods and they say no, but there is one that says all right, we're going to help. And that was her father, Enki. He realizes, and the reason what made him, not only because it's his daughter, but he realizes that if Inanna Venus dies, then what kind of ramifications is that going to have on Earth? The crops would not grow, there would be no procreation, world would become barren, and then the people would die. So he sends water and food of life. And this is how Inanna, is able to be resurrected again and live again. So she's brought back to life. But Ishkigal says, look, you can leave the underworld, but you have to find someone in your place to replace you. So I think there were some demons that kind of came. I know it sounds kind of demonic, which there were some underworld assistants, let's put it that way, to assist Inanna in her ascent into the world again, and then to find a replacement for her. And they were like, oh, well, what about your messenger, and she's like, no, no, she
Poor
helped.
messenger.
Yeah, she's like, no, she's my loyal messenger, you cannot have her. She lamented for me and mourned for me and raised the alarm, for my um for me to be brought back to life again, so no, you cannot have her. um so they're like, okay, and they continue on with her. And now this is the stage where she emerges out of the underworld with her with the guys in tow that are like, not gonna let her off free, be like, we're gonna be with you until you tell us, who it is we're supposed to be taking back with us to the underworld. So she this is Venus appears in the sky. It's a physically, when we look in the sky, there's a period of time where she disappears because her proximity to the sun out like shines so brightly that it blocks the our view of Venus, and that is her descent into the underworld when she disappears, where we physically cannot see Venus in the sky anymore because she's under the beams of the sun. Now, when she comes back out and emerges from under the beams of the sun, and she's a morning star. You see her in the morning, the bright star before the rising of the sun. You can see her in the sky. When she's a morning star rising, or too much astrology, but what it symbolizes is that she now appears as physically, you can see, like to the naked eye, you can see she has a little bit of red to her, and it's almost kind of symbolic of the battering, the bloody, the trials that she just went through, her resurrection, the extreme trauma that she went through, and by some miracle she's alive, and so there's this vibe of like, I am here, I survived, um, and so she now can be seen in the morning as this emblem of hope, and just like, wow, you just survived such a traumatic experience. And so that's the stage 5, where she appears, but she's battered, she's bruised, she's like, yes, like, I am here, I'm now back from the underworld, and I got this. She's not completely at 100% strength, but she's slowly gaining strength, right? That's like us once we've gone through something traumatic and like a dark night of the soul, and you reappear into society, or society, but you reappear as like a, someone who's just gone through some crazy stuff that if you told someone, they probably wouldn't believe you, and you just feel like, wow, like I have a lot of work ahead of me, but I'm optimistic and I know what I need to do. And I'm going to like forge ahead with this newfound confidence and skill and ability. Right.
And
So,
wisdom too
oh, yeah.
from all of the darkness and the learnings. I have a question. Did she give the
Well,
demons something for the underworld?
we're not there yet, but yes. Now, so she comes into her power, she's gaining strength. And she's now, as the morning star reappeared with the little bit of red in her, to the naked eye, she is now known as the goddess of war, battle, and assertiveness. And she's taking control of the situation because we have this newfound wisdom, right? We just had undergone this transformation. So when, yeah, so when you have the morning star Venus in your chart, it's very much like this assertive, powerful, take charge, I got this, I'm autonomous kind of type of energy. And so she's picking up and gaining power. And she races back because she's like, I gotta go see Demutsi, her husband, and let him know that I'm okay and that I'm still alive. But as she arrives, she sees him on her throne, living it up, like not even a care in the world. He's got some dancers and what entertainment going on, and just completely like just living in luxury. Like, probably wouldn't even have been aware that she was gone. And she's just like, just so like, oh, my husband, who should have cared for my well-being or my whereabouts, doesn't even care that I was gone. And now I'm like, so she was like, angered, and like, and said to, the guards, like, him, take him as my replacement to the underworld. So
Oh my gosh, I did not see that coming.
Yeah. So it was the husband, it was Demutsi that ended up taking her spot and going down there into the underworld and yeah, kind of paying the price for living too luxurious and too content in her absence.
Very interesting. The
Mm,
symbology can almost be like the one who does the work wins the prize. The one
mhm,
who just sat around and kicked their feet back and
mhm,
didn't work on themselves, didn't go through any darkness, didn't have any
mhm,
comprehension,
mhm,
well, they don't get to rule the kingdom
mhm.
figuratively, right? Very interesting.
Exactly. Now, the reason why I was kind of putting that emphasis on the morning star is because the morning star Venus is because there's a difference between the evening star Venus, which we saw in stage 1 and 2 of just just consummated the marriage and living in union and feeling very supported by Demutsi. That was stage 1 and 2, right? A little bit of curiosity as to, oh, surely there's more to life than this, you know. So that is an evening star and evening star Venus, and she is content and happy in her partnership, in a loving relationship with her other with Demutsi. Now she's gone through all of those stages and she's come out as a morning star Venus, and now she's like she's no longer the goddess of, well, she's now in a stage in a different phase of her goddessness. She's not really embodying the whole love and fertility of the earth type of thing, although she probably still has that as well, but it's more like she's now embracing and embodying this powerful, assertive, autonomous person, because now Demutsi is it's gone to the underworld in her place, and so now she's reigning as this powerful, wise goddess on her own as an autonomous being, and she is dispensing justice. People come to her with their concerns, and she will punish the wicked and give blessings to the righteous. She's in a position of meting out justice to both the worthy and the unworthy. So, this we can see. You could see this in your birth chart. If you have this Venus, morning star Venus, maybe that can be symbolic or representative of how you are sometimes in love, right? Like you can be this autonomous, you know, powerful, all wise, all knowing, wise person, as opposed to this like content. And I say this because I have a morning star Venus in my chart, and I've always wondered, like, I've always just wanted to be in union, like complete bliss with someone. And then there's always been this, oh, I'm, you know, too outspoken. I'm too, like I'm too, have too big of an opinion, you know. So, you know,
So the other
there's,
person didn't accept your own authority and position.
no, and I had to sacrifice them to the underworld. No, just kidding.
They've been taken now.
Jokesy. Yeah, so that's we're almost at the end. Now, so she's in her full embodied, you know, warrior. She's like Xena, warrior princess. Like just ruling, you know, like, you know, the just and the unjust will be served, right? To you know, she's yeah, so she's living that life at the moment. Yeah, she eventually stayed that one of the last stages is over time, because there's a huge, maybe like 80 days, but at this during this stage of she starts realizing that, well, and this is a little bit symbolic too. It's like, well, actually, after quite a period of time, she's like, well, she starts to rethink the decision she made to have Demutsi go to the underworld in her place, and she's had a change of heart. She's like, well, you know, maybe he wasn't such a bad person after all, and it's a bit of like this period regret of the breakup. And I think sometimes we go through this where we've been quick to end a relationship or end something, and a little bit later, once you're back a week, a few weeks, a few months, whatever, as you go down later on in on the path, you realize, you start to kind of change your heart and think, well, maybe actually he wasn't so bad after all. And did I really have to do that? Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because this leads to the final stage of what ends up happening, is that she decides to strike up a deal, and she says to Demutsi, "You can come and live with me for 6 months of the year, but someone has to take your place while you're here with me." And at that person ended up being Demutsi's sister. So Demutsi's sister would go into the underworld, and then he would come up, and then Inanna slash Venus would enjoy a life of partnership with him for that duration. And then where everything's prosperous, everything's growing in abundance. And then he goes back to the underworld. And then maybe that's more symbolic of like this spring, summer versus the winter time where it kind of goes barren. And then we've harvested our crops already and everything's kind of dead. But so that's how it worked. And so the cycle begins again where she emerges as an evening star in partnership with someone, aka Demutsi, for like 6 months of the year. And then the cycle again. Oh, she questions, oh, is this for me? Something comes up. She goes into the underworld. She dies. Yeah. So it's like a full like loop de loop cycle.
So she just keeps doing the same journey.
Well, yeah, it's yes, because it's Venus and the Sun, and they have their cycle every 2 years where they
Mm.
do this dance. And but I just thought, we are going to have Venus retrograde, and so she is going to be embodying one of these 8, 9 stages. But I thought it would be fun to just go through the mythology and symbolic, cyclical nature of the sun and Venus in a legendary mythology type of sense. And yeah, it'll go retrograde on the 20. Oh, it'll be the 1st or 2nd of March. So we still have a couple of weeks, but
It's coming
yeah,
around soon. Yeah.
yeah, and
And then so what does that mean for us practically when it
mhm,
goes retrograde?
mhm.
And then we're going to go into a 2-year period. So from the 1st of March,
Well,
then
yeah, it's not so clean cut. It's probably, I would have to go through where we're at in this cycle right
mm,
now.
okay.
We because she's going to turn retrograde, meaning she's under the beams. Wait, is she? Where are we? 16th. She's not quite under the beams yet, but so yeah, we're not at stage one. We're kind of somewhere maybe around stage, because she is a evening star. So she is, where did we say evening star was? Somewhere around stage 6. So we're kind of in that stage 6, 7, stage 5, my bad. Where's she? No, that's morning star. Oh yeah, no, she is, my bad. um I think it's probably less important to know where we're at right now, but to
Mm-hmm.
identify the cycle itself, because I think we might all be at different stages in
Oh,
relation
because
to our natal chart.
right, right. So it's not that we are all going into a specific period, but
Mm,
unless we can read our natal chart, then we don't actually know what it specifically means for us.
mhm. Yeah, and also I could try and figure out where in relation to the sun Venus is, and then pinpoint, okay, we are in stage 4. But if that doesn't resonate with you, I don't want to say it, not kidding. Like
Oh, like is 4 where we get hung up.
it's almost like saying, oh, we're at stage 4 right now, and it's like, oh, that's at the death stage, and I
Right.
don't actually feel like I'm at any death right now of any kind of dark night of the soul. So,
But isn't it going to
anger.
come? It's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. It's yeah, it's coming. So yeah, but more, I think importantly, just for this, because it would take a little bit
Mm,
more of a bigger session to go through where we're at right now, which I would like to go through later on, and a little bit more of the significations of Venus and Aries, and that is a little bit a more of a bigger topic as well to tackle. So I just want to leave with you guys the descent of Inanna into the underworld, and how we can take those different meanings, and maybe have it resonate in not just right now, but reflecting on past cycles where we have been through similar similar journeys, and reflecting on what you had learnt, as opposed to this is where we're at right now, and so
right. Yeah, I
bury
got
the
it.
hatchet and prepare for the worst, because yeah, it will get it. Yeah, it's relative to everyone. So,
Sure. Well,
but,
having a framework or a way
mm,
to reflect on how far we've come, what lessons we've learned, our own internal darkness can be very useful. And this episode, we're talking about healing our fragmentation. And if you don't understand what that means, fair enough. I think if we backtrack a little bit, the first step is to understand that we have fragmentation. And it's like in the myth that you described, when we want to understand ourselves, we go into our own interior darkness and we
mm,
see what's there. When we see what's there, we begin to understand it. And then in understanding it, then we're able to transcend it. So the key part in understanding our current fragmented nature is looking deep inside of ourselves and realizing that there are many different parts, and these parts may not always agree with one another. So to give a simple example, and this is something of a Zen koan, that when you're meditating, there are different methods that you can use. One kind of method is to use the mind to beat the mind by having a specific phrase that the mind can never understand.
I
And
love
then you
that.
can cut through it and discover wisdom and insights. So, one classic question is, who am I? And if you sat with that for some hours and you were maybe an experienced meditator, you might have some deep realizations, because you'll keep going through the question through and through, and you'll find there is no who, there is no I. This is the wisdom that a lot of the Buddhists have discovered. And a real basic way to address this question, if you're not an experienced meditator, is to consider your name and your culture,
Mm,
because we can catch up so much of our identity in these things.
mm,
If someone says, say someone walks up to me at a party and they're being a little bit smarmy or cocky, and they say,
mm,
huh, who are you? you know then you say, I might say, oh, I'm Ruth, I work in such and such, and I am from such and such. But that doesn't actually say who I am. That is not the full picture of
mhm,
who I am, because I could easily swap those things out and I would still be me. But then who's that? Because I've just interchanged those parts. So it can be a very interesting exercise to play with. And people can be afraid of doing this kind of exercise. And if you're not stable, you shouldn't do it, because it's confronting. But the whole purpose of it is to go deeper and to realize these surface level elements do not constitute the myself.
mm,
We say to someone, Things like, oh, I wish I had your body. What does that imply? I could swap out the body. So the body is not me. There's something deeper, something
Mm,
essential. And we really need to lean into these ideas to start to understand what they mean. When we're practicing with understanding the self, we mentioned this last episode, one of our first key tools is self observation. And how we do that is we our awareness is almost behind us. There are many practices called open awareness practices that can train us to observe the person, my person. And then we start to have this really good bird's eye view of what's happening in our intellect, what's happening in our emotions, and what's happening in our instincts, where we automatically do things. One open awareness practice that we can try is to imagine that the body or the person is a phenomena that's arising within a field of awareness, and just sit with that concept and keep sitting there imagining that this phenomena is something that is appearing. I'm a field of awareness, and this thing is appearing, is manifesting within the field. And if you work with that for a while, maybe over, depending on where you're at, some weeks, some months, then slowly you'll start to see it. And it could be weird at first when you first see it, because now your awareness is the field and the person is inside the field. But the purpose of this is not just to play a mind game, it's to create that separation that allows us to not identify with the circumstances and to be a really strong observer that can observe the external circumstances and the internal mechanics. And this is where it starts to get interesting, because now that we've become the spy and we're watching, then we start to notice that there are many parts. We start to discover the truth about ourselves. I know we talked about parts theory in the past, but it's one thing to have it as a theory. It's another thing altogether to see it for yourself. It's almost as though there are a whole bunch of characters, and they come and step in. There's the character there, whether it's some sort of desire or frustration, and it comes and it plays up, and then it floats away. And then another character comes in. Now, the reason this is important is because sometimes both characters try to come in at the same time. And this is where we experience some kind of an internal conflict or internal division. This feeling of being almost like a multiplicity can cause us so much pain.
mm,
So, when a classic example is, let's say you have a new love interest, and on one hand, there's a part of you that resonates with their good qualities, and maybe you start to feel magnetized towards them for very specific things that you see in them and you appreciate in them. On the other hand, give it enough time, and there may be some things that to you, they're just not landing. They're just so different. They see things really differently. Some of their idiosyncrasies you find to be a nuisance. And of course, if it's going to work out, then you have that compassionate love that is going to see past it. But where it doesn't work out, you have one of your characters come in and says, this just doesn't work for me, this doesn't resonate. And then maybe they're fighting, and then this other character will come and say, oh, but they have these other good qualities which I admire. And you have this struggle. The other person can feel it when you have this internal struggle. So you might be spending time with them, hanging out, and the other person is going to feel very unsettled because they notice that part of you is magnetized towards them. and another part of you is pushing them away. And the other person can become confused because they're going, well, which one is it? The truth is, it's both of them because they're both there. They're very real characters. And this internal conflict can cause a lot of pain for the person that's experiencing the indecision about their choice of love interest and the other party. But again, it's no one's fault as such. This is a very normal, common thing that happens. And I would say if you're on the dating scene, you might say this is 90% of these types of encounters and getting to know people. We'll find that we're so different and we're not going to necessarily be drawn to every aspect of them. So my point in using this example is that we have a lot of internal contradiction and a lot of difficulty reconciling the different parts of ourselves. And it doesn't always, it's not only in relationships that we see this arise, it often can arise where we're setting goals and we have some kind of direction that we're moving towards. And then another part of us will self sabotage. Let's say, for example, there is some new opportunity for you to move into another position in your company. And one part of you, on the one hand, is interested in this movement, moving into a new challenge, having new sorts of experiences. There may be a self sabotage part of you that is just so afraid when there's a new opportunity to move out of your comfort zone, it automatically comes in and says no. So you experience this, and maybe the self sabotage or the part that runs away from opportunities to grow and to experience that discomfort of trying something new, maybe it's really strong. And this other part that's brave and wants to take up the challenge is down here. So this part always wins. But this little voice is there and it's saying, I do want to try. I want to have new experiences, please. But then this one is like overbearing and just says, no, I'm gonna just not give it a go. And then the funny part is this part of us, and you could say it's like multiple egos that are all fighting for the center of the stage. This part might create some kind of a justification, that is its excuse, so that it doesn't admit that it's scared or not wanting to take up the opportunity. It's afraid of failure. Instead of saying that, it's going to make an excuse that's going to sound really nice and reasonable and logical. For example, with this promotion, it might say, oh, I'm not really interested in that position because I don't want to do A, B, C, D. But actually, that's not true. Now, in some cases, that could be true. But in the case that I'm describing where it is a kind of self-sabotage, then the the character is going to make up a fake excuse to kind of trick you and not let that other part say, I'm going to try it. I'm going to just be comfortable doing the uncomfortable thing. So
Mm-hmm.
this is an example of how these internal contradictions work and how we make up these stories to make the contradiction make sense. So another example is, say someone is smoking and a part of them wants to quit. The other part of them has all of this soothing and comfort that comes from the habit. So it's going to make up a story that is going to allow this contradiction of, I want to be healthy, but I want to smoke. And how can both of these characters live at home in peace? Well, the winning character is going to be the one that has the most convincing argument, even if the argument is not true. So, for example, it's going to say, well, my grandfather smoked and he died at 79. And I think that's well above the average lifespan of 75. So he had a whole 4 extra years. That sounds great to me. I think smoking is healthy. And my grandfather is a great example. So if we look through that, we can see that it's not a logical conclusion, but this is how these characters behave. So if we are observing and we want to catch them red-handed, kind of like catching a thief in the middle of the heist, then we've got to be very keen, just alert, watching the things that we are saying to ourselves or to someone else. And it doesn't matter if we let the character get away with it this time. The important thing is that we saw how they operate. And someone has said, uh, an ego that you see is as good as dead because once you see it in action, then you're starting to understand its mechanics, its tricks. And at some stage, if you're just watching very carefully, you're going to realize its patterns. And when you keep watching, it's going to run out of good excuses and arguments that can fool you. So it is a very useful practice when well applied. It's not easy because we love our contradictions and we're so used to believing our own logic. It's like the time I told you about before where I had a family member that I was blaming. And when I was in my own false logic, it was a blame game. But once I finally had this kind of like a shock, I snapped out of it and I realized, oh, these stories I've been telling myself, they are 100% an illusion. And I love telling them to myself because then I can complain and I can feel like a victim and feel all hurt. And I can have all this self compassion for myself and I can wallow in it. And it feels really nice, but it's not true. It's not objective reality. And I'm not referring to the times where someone actually is maybe being mean and nasty, but there's a good portion of these situations where it is completely blown out of proportion in our minds because we don't want to admit what part we played in that dance. And the objective reality has it has some component where we did something as well in those interactions. So it's a very interesting exercise to first begin to observe and then understand, see those fragmented parts, and start to uh, see how they are misguiding us into unhappiness so that we can move into a more grounded and fulfilling way of being. Now, I want to ask you, Bianca, have you worked much with these concepts and what did you experience?
Um, yeah, I think it was more of like the whole concept of first detaching yourself and just becoming the observer. That has been very beneficial for me to be able to see my patterns and to see the stories that I'm telling myself. And um and when, like you said, like when we start to see these, like this internal battle like of the different egos wanting to be the center, front and center, right? Once you see it, I've noticed that it's now been brought into my awareness, and I now it becomes a choice. Do I continue with this, with the story that I've been telling myself, or do I let it go? So it feels a little bit more empowering. So, and yeah, there's I definitely have, whether I've specifically labeled this as a process or not, it's just something that has naturally over time that I've learnt to do, because I think if you are trying to um, improve your life and your happiness and find ways to cope with the stress of life and anxiety and things like that, you know, this all kind of happens that you just go through these cycles of observation and being real with yourself and seeing where you are um, prohibiting development and growth. So what stories are not no longer helpful for you? So yeah, everything that you said just resonated totally. Yeah.
I love that even
Hmm.
though someone has compiled these ideas and you can find them in a variety of books and writings, you essentially discovered all of these for yourself as your own wisdom and knowledge without anyone telling you. And that just confirms how these types of experiences and the phenomena of the internal parts and conflict and observation understanding, they are universally true. They are something very real inside of us. Someone else discovered it and wrote it down, and you discovered it without having read what they wrote. You didn't write it down, and all this time you've been working with those same tools. So that's a beautiful testament that those tools can be effective and work.
Mm.
And now we're seeing it so commonly everywhere where there's self-help information. Just
Hmm.
observe, just observe. In Vipassana, they had it in their tradition that your number one
Yeah.
friend is observation without judgment.
Yep. Yep.
The pure light of consciousness shining upon the
Hmm.
darkness to see what is there. And
Hmm.
you'll see this again and again in psychology and in all of those little well-being diagrams. Just
Hmm.
observe, notice the feelings, notice your body, what is happening, what is in this moment,
Hmm.
or the power of now, be present. It's
Hmm.
all the same truth, and it doesn't really matter how you say it. The truth doesn't care what words you use to describe it. It is
Exactly.
true, and it can set us free. There's a very important point that I want to raise here, and that's around tension. So,
Mm.
say in Vipassana, they said, just observe without judgment, without tension. And when someone hears these concepts and says, okay, I want to understand myself, what are my different conflicting parts, my different egos that are fighting to gain the center stage, and how are they causing unhappiness to me and those around me? When they notice something dark and sinister internally, maybe it's shame or judgment or feelings of lack or inadequacy, even a belief in poverty, whatever it is that they find, and they when you didn't see it before and then you see it, sometimes there's almost this kind of disgust or whoa, that's inside of me.
Oh
And
yeah.
we're shocked, right? We want to be these perfect angels when we dive into our darkness. It Our illusion is shattered. It's like we said in the last episode, and it's very confronting because it doesn't align with this whole goody two shoes image that we've conjured in our
Hmm.
minds. But it's part of the process that we need to sit with it, sit with the discomfort, and see
Hmm.
it, allow it, make space for it, don't judge it. And that can lead to the wisdom where we understand it, where it
Hmm.
came from, why we're doing this, what is at the root, and what is the alternative that I want to see? What is the virtue or the character element that I want to demonstrate in its stead? So if I'm fearful and I'm running away of these chances to embrace life in its fullness, then courage is what I want. That's what I want to demonstrate and emulate. So I'm going to meditate on courage and how can I embody that? The big key here that I want to highlight is do not get into a battle of wills or tension
Mm.
where you just kind of think, if I just suppress it without having understood it and just been spacious and kind and accepted it. Because when we get into a battle of wills, we are going to fortify that part of us. It is going to have a lot of pushback. And let's say it's anxiety, for example. If you have anxiety and you try to not be anxious, say you're going to be doing public speaking or you're going to be meeting a new friend group that you're not used to, then the more you fight it, the worse it's going to get.
Mm.
And this
Yeah.
is how people become paralyzed. If someone has stage fright, in its very worst case, they can vomit. You know, the body has this big
Oh yeah.
reaction because they're out, man. They don't want to do it. And maybe if they vomit, they'll get messy and they won't have to go on stage. So this shows us that if we fight it through suppression, we are going to, we're not going to get anywhere. We think we're doing the right thing, but it's going to get worse. So the real key is we need to observe, we need to have no judgment or shame, just allow that darkness, kind of like that story going down into the underworld. Just see it, just notice it, be with it, and seek to understand, seek to comprehend it, and
Yeah.
have those insights from it. And when we can see clearly and we understand how we've been duped by its false logic, then it doesn't have anything on us anymore because
Hmm.
those fake stories won't work. And then it's almost like if we sit with that, you know, take that time to reflect and introspect, we have a kind of understanding that comes from the heart. If we intellectualize, that's where we get into the battle of
Mm.
opposites, the battle of
Yeah.
wills. And I need to have a better character. I need to be brave. And then you see, I remember at Toastmasters, there was this one girl who got up to speak. She's not in our speech club anymore, but she was shaking so bad that everyone watching started shaking as well. It was really uncomfortable to watch, and she took a long time to say every sentence. And how did she get into that? She was definitely thinking about it in her head way too much before she got up there on stage instead of being present and just going, whew, okay, I got this. It's a fake speech anyway. It's a speech club. I'm fine. She thought about it way too much. Whereas if we drop into our heart and just feel the moment, feel our body, and just have a kind of trust in the universe and seek to understand, then there's so much wisdom in that. So I think in closing, I would say that just remember knowledge comes from the mind, but comprehension
Mm.
comes from the heart. There is so much hope for all of us, no matter what you're dealing with. Is it financial struggles? Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it interpersonal conflicts? Is it fear or shame? Or even feeling superior to other people and then realizing that that is very isolating and you don't want to be that way? Whatever it is that you are struggling with, the prescription, the remedy is the same. And you can start right now. It's observe without judgment, understand, and dissolve. It's a kind of transcendence that comes from your heart wisdom. And so we can go through that dark night of the soul and we can rise again to our rightful place in the stars, just to bring it back to that myth.
Mm. I like that.
And yeah, that brings us to the end of this episode. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you for listening. And remember, the path to your best reality is in your hands to create.